Well, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about how we encode data serially. Now, when we're sending data between computers, or if we're storing it on a storage medium, we need a way of turning the ones and zeros that represent all of the numbers that we have in our memory cells into something physically representable, be it, we talked about punch card before now. I allude to sort of hard disks and floppy disks and tape drives and whatever. And we're going to start basic, but and I know a lot of folks will be like, oh my gosh, should we talk about old computer stuff again? And I mean, yes, because I love it. But I'm going to hopefully prove to you that this is a worthwhile thing to do. And eventually we get to something that is currently plugged into the back of my computer. So we'll see. We'll see how far we get. I know you're a musical guy because I can see the guitars behind you. So I'm going to hope that this analogy works for you. I'm going to try and clap to you because whatever thing we store data on, what we're effectively going to have is something which either has the presence or absence of something. And so I'm going to have a clap as the presence and then me not clapping as the absence of it, right? And we're going to see what problems a system that would try to encode data will come across, because humans will have those problems too, right? We'll be much worse than electronics. So I'm going to clap out an 8-bit number to you where a clap is a 1 and a gap is a 0. And I'm only going to tell you that, right? What I will tell you, yeah, you're going to get pen and paper ready so you can actually write something down.
Here we go.
Yeah, I've sprung this on you.
That's okay. I'm happy with that. That's good. It sounds like it's going to be interesting.
I'm going to cheat and tell you that the first bit is a 1. So there's no worry about having some number of zeros at the beginning. And I'm going to sort of aim for about 80, 90 BPM. All right? Just to give you some idea. And I'm going to try not to obviously tap my foot because that would give you another signal, right? So I'm going to try and do it close. So if you're ready, here it comes. Okay. I don't know how well that comes across and whether every kind of filtering system is trying to remove the claps. So what number did you get?
See, this is going to be terrible because I looked away, so I'm trying to just do it from the sound. And
right. Which is all
I just heard 3 claps. I don't know what the gaps were. I don't know. I know you said 80 BPM, but still. I got 10101000 because I just made an assumption that the zeros were all at the end after that. So
right,
that's where I've gone with it.
Yeah. So you said you got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out a byte, and this is one of my favourite little things that I learnt as a kid. So you draw a big rectangle, you divide it in half, and then you divide it in half, and you divide those halves in halves, and then you go back to the other one and divide the other ones in halves in a lovely sort of recursive algorithm. And now I've got 8 bits that are kind of somewhat equally spaced, right? So you said you got 1, 0. Yep. What was next?
1, 0 again.
Yep.
And then 1, 0.
And then 1, 0.
Yep. And then I assumed the rest were zeros. But I mean, equally, it could be 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. I suppose that's
exactly.
Where we go with this,
so
right? Yeah.
We've hit the first problem here, which is that unless you and I can synchronize our BPMs and our clocks together, it's quite difficult to know how many zeros there were in a row. And that is a problem that computers have too. So the number I actually clapped to you, or I tried to clap to you, what I think I clapped to you, was 10100001. So there was actually 4 zeros in a row, but it's really hard to notice when there's that many zeros in a row. Now, with if you're playing like a band, it's not like you have a metronome going that tells you exactly how to do. How do you kind of stay in sync with the rest of the band?
Yeah. Okay. So usually you start with a count, right? So I play the drums. I also play bits of other instruments, but playing the drums, usually if it's a 4/4, you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then everybody takes a rough guide off that 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. And so that's definitely something we could do. And so, in fact, when we send data over like a serial port, which is, like an old school cable, typically you agree on the basic speed that everything's going to be. And then there's a bit at the beginning that says, I'm the beginning, and then you send the bits, and then you just hope that it's good enough. And usually it is, right? And that's sort of a little bit like the counted. It's not quite the same, I'll be honest with you, but it's in the same ballpark. But for those slow speeds, computers are accurate enough, 9600 baud, or, this is 9600 bits per second. It's like, which sounds fast, but is incredibly slow by today's standards. The problem we have here is that we can't have these long gaps, right? If there were lots of ones in a row, you could probably kind of feel where the pulse is. And that's what I was sort of getting to. So once you've counted in a band situation, there's usually enough other beats going on, even if there are occasionally ones that are missed or whatever, that you got the groove. And you're like, even if I start to get out of sync with it, I can kind of use the next beat to go, well, that was probably, I was getting a tiny bit fast. I'll just slow my clock down a little bit, my internal clock, unless you're listening to some kind of crazy prog rock Tool thing where they're deliberately, changing the whatever, or there's a long gap. I mean, we've all done it. If you've ever sat in an orchestra before now, I play the clarinet and then it's like, there's 37 bars of rest here. And you're like, okay, you start to doze off and then you're like, what I've miscounted, right? But there's still something to count from. So this is like how a serial port would work, like a slow serial port. It would just kind of relies on the fact that clocks aren't that bad. But if I were to try and do this in terms of like drum patterns, what if instead of sending 1 beat per bit, I send 2. Okay, so this is going to be more claps or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this same number. This is always just therapeutic for me to draw these things out. The other thing, while we're here, incidentally, if you've ever thought about this, you've probably covered this 100 times before, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more in a second. It's trivial to turn binary into hexadecimal, which you may not have, it may not be obvious to all people. You just look at groups of 4 bits and you go, well, what's this number here? 1010. So I'm looking here. This is 1, 2, 4, and 8. So 2 and 8 is 10. 10 in hex is, testing you here. A, yep. A. And then this is the number 1, 1000. So this is A1 in hex. It's really easy to write them out. That's one of the main reasons we use hexes. It's just a convenient way of grouping together digits. I just love that these 4 bits are called nibbles. They're like, there's half a byte. Anyway, right, that's nothing to do with anything. Moving on. So what I'm going to do instead here is for each one, I'm going to effectively do a quaver. I'm going to move to musical notation now. And then for a 0, I'm going to do a quaver with a half beat rest. So essentially this is a double clap, this is a single clap. Or you could think of this as a quarter note, which is a crotchet. Crotchet? Yeah, crotchet, there you are. The weird things you realise after years of living in a country that they say differently. All right, so in fact we're going to sort of turn these into, and this will give you something nice to draw, squiggle. So effectively I always have a beat on the beat of the bar. I always have a clap on the beat of the bar. And then,
that's your clock effectively, and then it's whether the second part of that. I got that right, okay.
Exactly. So now my 100 is like clap. Sorry, I won't say clap at the same time because I'm clapping. It'll be and at all times, you can keep your internal metronome going, and now it's pretty trivial to do this kind of stuff. So this is called FM encoding, frequency modulation, FM. And I mean, you always think of like FM, like radio dials and whatever. That is also frequency modulation, but this is a different kind of frequency modulation because what we're doing is we're modulating the frequency of the clicks, and it's either at like 2 times the speed of the pulse or 1 times the speed of the pulse. And that's a great way of encoding data. And then this is used, for example, on, and I'm going to pull out from behind here. Oh, if I don't knock my coffee over. My favourite medium, which is a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. There's one of the ways that you can store data on this, because you need to be able to store data, and you need to be able to find, and deal with the fact that like this is a physical object that's spinning, and when it spins, it's not spinning exactly the same speed all the time. It's not perfect. You have clever motors and things in there, but you need to account for the fact that maybe it's running a little bit fast, maybe it's running a bit slow, maybe it's even wobbling as the disk is rotating. And so having this kind of self-synchronization thing where the pulse is kind of speed, the tempo may be changing a little bit is cool. And there's a physical system called a phase-locked loop, which allows essentially a tuner to lock into the beat and then adjust the internal expected time, the clock, sort of an internal clock based on when these clock pulses are coming, and then as long as there's enough clock pulses, it can work out what's going on and get the synchronization. So we can store data now. Fabulous. We have another physical problem, which is that obviously I'm clapping away at this speed, like at 90 BPM or whatever it is I'm actually clapping at. The second issue we have is there's only so fast I can clap. Right, just the physical action of clapping. Now, this is my analogy because on something like a floppy disk, the way that the claps are encoded is that there is a section of the disk that's magnetized in one direction, and whenever it switches direction, you get a tiny little pulse when you drag a reader over the top of it. And so it's the difference, it's those transitions that cause a little pulse, and that pulse is the clap. Now, I can't put magnetic regions close enough together in some cases because there's just physics involved, and physics doesn't let you put these things close enough together. So you need a gap between them, and that's sort of the same as like the analogy of I can clap at maybe 200 BPM. I don't know, it'd be exhausting, but so I've kind of got a cap as to how. Oh, we've got sticks. I'm sure you can drum much faster than that.
Oh dear, who knows? Who knows? I'm getting on a bit. Right. Anyway, sorry, I distracted you.
That's perfectly fine. No, but that's why I picked this topic, because I thought we could talk about some kind of music. So what we want to be able to do is something like FM encoding, but I want to go faster. And the way that I can go faster is by making sure that whatever encoding I do has gaps between the claps, more gaps between the claps. And so what we're going to do is we're going to modify this frequency modulation. And this is foreshadowing because it's called MFM, modified frequency modulation. And now we're going to do a trick where instead of unconditionally storing the clap of the clock pulse, we're going to miss it out if there have been other pulses recently. So if, like effectively, this is like saying, if we have a long gap in the middle of a bar, we might all get out of sync. But even if there's a syncopated beat, I can still kind of know where the real beat is just because the syncopation keeps me on track enough. So I'm going to encode a 1. Well, a 1 bit, I'm going to say has a clap in it. And so I don't need to encode a clock ever for a 1. So I'm going to have a little gap where the clock would be, and then I'm going to have my sort of oneness is the second beat of this bar. So it's a little syncopated offbeat click. For my 0, I'm going to say, well, I need a clock pulse because a 0 doesn't have a clock pulse of its own. Except that if it's just happened next to a 1 beat, again, I'm going to assume that we're all in phase still. I don't need to. So I'm actually going to, for this 0 here, let me just write my 1 0 1 0 0 0 0 1 over the top. So this is FM above there. For my 0, that after I've had a 1, I'm actually just going to have a full rest, which I can never draw. So I'm going to do a sort of lightning strike thing and hope that some magical graphics happen. Again, my 1 is always going to be a heartbeat rest followed by a quaver. Again, the 0, it's just after a 1, so that's a squiggle. Now we're at a 0. Now, if we were to just do rest, 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 we'd fall quickly into the problem of falling out of phase. So after a 0, I'm going to say, okay, well, I just need to accept having to put a little clock pulse back in again on the beat to keep me all in step here. So that's going to be the same for those 3. And then last of all, this 1 here is a break followed by a beat. And so maybe because if you're not good at reading music, I realize this might be a problem. I'm going to actually break this into 16 bits, which are whether there's a pulse or not. That might be slightly easier to read. So let me just quickly kind of line up a 16 underneath here. So this one would be 0 1 0 0 0 1 0 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 0 1. Right. So we've got 16 bits to represent 8 bits, which is already not like a great thing. I mean, we effectively do up here as well, right? If you just think about it as these quavers of being 2 bits and whatever. So on the face of it, this doesn't look any better. We still have 16 bits to encode 8 bits of data. But the cool thing here is that there's always at least 1 0 between any 2 ones. Our encoding is clever like that. We always have at least 1 gap, and we always have no more than 3 zeros in a row. And provided our synchronization system, this PLL, the phase locked loop, keeps us in sync, it'll only ever have a gap of 3, and that it should be fine for 3 bits. And we never need to clap 2 beats right next to each other, which means we can actually double the frequency. We can actually write this to the disk twice as quickly, and so we can get twice as much data in the same amount of physical space on the disk without breaking this problem of having 2 claps too close together. It does mean that the listener, in your case you, if I were to try and clap this out, which I'm not going to do to you, just to be fair, it does mean the listener has to be quite accurate at noticing when things are on the beat or off the beat a little bit, but we're assuming that's something that the electronics can do well. The thing that we're accounting for is the fallible physics of a spinning disk and the fact that you need to have big enough areas energized before you switch to get this click. So this is MFM encoding. And if you've ever seen disk drives, old floppy disks that say double density, those ones are using MFM encoding, whereas single density is using FM encoding. And it's exactly that. We're packing bits in twice as hard into the same area of space by using a different encoding. And there are some other physical characteristics between the disks, as I recall, but I'm not an expert on physical materials. And this is cool. The other cool thing about MFM and FM, there's ways of doing it in FM as well, but we'll stick with MFM here, just to sort of like finish this bit out, is that if you imagine like this disk, let me pull it out again. Oh gosh, all the dust on it. This disk is spinning at 300 revolutions per minute. And effectively each track is a concentric circle of data. And so as it's spinning around, we're seeing the same data 300 times a minute whiz past. Now, somehow we have to work out where the beginning is of a sector or the bit of data that we want to read off of it. You know, I know that if I want to get a particular track, you can hear the thing moving, as it sort of moves the head out to a particular location along the length of the disk. But then as it's spinning around, how do I know that I'm reading the right blob of data? It's just a stream of ones and zeros that are coming through. How on earth could it make sense of that? And so we know that it's MFM encoding. What if we were to say, well, the physical characteristics mean that my system can't deal with more than 3 zeros in a row. But if I were to write the value A1 to the disk using this bit pattern here, right, first of all, that would just look like a piece of data. I couldn't discriminate that from like a user having written the value A1 to some piece of data somewhere. But what if I were to cheat and say, well, there are lots of ones and zeros here. What if I were to take this clock bit here, this 1 bit, and actually flip it to 0? So I'm going to actually write out 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. That's not valid by the encoding we've just talked about. 1, 0, 0, 1. What we now have is a sequence of bits which still doesn't have more than 3 zeros in a row, still doesn't have 2 ones next to each other, but no byte that I can write to the disk if I'm using the coding will ever look this way. And so it's kind of a unique bit pattern. And so what the drive does is the drive controller, as it's spinning the disk through, it's looking for a sequence of 16 bits that look like this. And it knows there's no way that could possibly be other than this magic marker that says, hey, this is the beginning of a sector. And then there's some bytes after it that says, what sector number it is or whatever. And then there's another magic marker. And then it's like, and here's the data. So by having this encoding mechanism, it gives us a sort of magic special out that gives us a symbol that we can use that's outside of the valid values of data. And that's a really useful thing, and it's used in other encoding mechanisms, which, looking at the time now, we might have to talk about another time.
With the encoding, do you get a literal kind of doubling of space, or is there some kind of, is it in between? And you've encoded it so you can fit it into less space, but is there do you see what I'm saying? Is there a kind of...
Yeah, I do. No, this confused me for the longest time. It really did. So the encoding literally just changes the way that you encode the data. It's still 16 bits, and it will always still be 2 bits for every 1 bit that you're encoding. It's just that now the physical characteristics mean that you can double the speed that you're writing it out into the physical world, and the physical properties of like not having 2 pulses too close together or having 2 pulses too far apart is still kept. So unlike, say, like data compression and other encoding schemes where actually you're reducing the amount of data you're doing. All you're doing is storing it in a way that's more conducive to running the thing at twice the speed.
Right. Got you.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Again, that could confuse me forever, because I'm like, hang on a second, this changes the encoding. It doesn't actually reduce the number of bits that I'm writing out. Surely, how can that be? And then you realize, oh, physics comes along and makes it worthwhile. That's what we're doing, is we're working within the physical limitations of the disk medium. I'm sort of trying to build a case for why this is a useful and a valuable thing to be able to do. But now we kind of need to explain how we can extend our robot to do that. Now, first of all, naively, for each of these slots in the page table, we can say not only is it readable,